So what does the election of Javier Milei mean for Argentina, for its neighbors? What do you think he'll be able to accomplish? What are his proposals?
Well, the astonishing victory of Milei is very important for Argentina and for Latin America as well. He has been in politics just for 2 years. He hasn't been in a public office before. He is, an outsider in the political realm in Argentina, and he becomes like a phenomenon in Latin American politics. He won the election uh, with more than 55% of the votes against Sergio Massa, the candidate of the incumbent president. And he, according to the polls before the elections, they were tight. Nobody knew who was going to win. And the surprise for the polls is that he won with more than 10% over Massa. So there is an issue about polls because, you find this situation again and again in many countries where the polls supposedly are going to reflect the state of public opinion, and they come with results that don't match with what public opinion at the end um, say. So, well, we have that issue. Uh, uh, Millet has been very radical, as we all know. He is ending, uh, I would say, a very long time in Argentinian politics. We can say that we have this president, Guillermo Fernandez, along with his vice president, Cristina Kirchner, who was president twice before, who is the widow of former President Kirchner. Altogether, Nestor Kirchner, Cristina Fernandez, and Guillermo Fernandez account for 16 years in office, with a 4 years interval with President Macri, who is a liberal, and then after Cristina ended her term, Guillermo Fernandez was elected after Macri, and with Cristina as vice president. So this is a trend in Argentina that is not only about the Kirchner. It might be about Peronismo. The most important political trend in Argentina in the 20th century has been Peronismo, the movement founded by Juan Domingo Perón in the early 40s, 1940s. Perón was president for almost 9 years in the 40s, and then he was president again for less than a year because he died, and his wife, Estelita Martinez de Perón, was in charge until she was, there was a coup from the military for 7 years. There was a terrible dictatorship in which almost 30,000 people were killed, tortured, or disappeared from 1976 to 1983. So began again democracy with President Raúl Alfonsín, and the current process until now, the election of Milei. Milei represents, I would say, not only an outsider, but also a very radical, he called himself anarcho-capitalist, in the sense that he is very radical in many terms. He said, just a few days ago, that he was the first president ever in the world to be a radical liberal elected for office. He has been very conflictive in his electoral campaign, going against the Pope, that is also an Argentinian, as we know, against the casta. He says the casta of the politicians in Argentina. He is against Maduro. He has been against Lula in Brazil and other presidents from the left. So he is representing a very radical change in Argentina. In the first round, he was competing against two other candidates, Sergio Massa from the actual government and Patricia Bullrich, a liberal but less radical than Milei. For the ballotage were elected Massa and Milei. And what happened was that Milei, of course, has a lot of support, but former President Macri and the defeated Patricia Bullrich sided with Milei and supported him for the ballotage that was going to held last Sunday. And they work very hard for having Milei elected as president. And he was elected. He recognized the support of former President Macri and from former candidate Patricia Bullrich. And he is now moderating, in some sense, his speech. He has a very interesting program for his government. He has a plan according to which the most important issue is the reform of the state. He thinks that the Argentinian state is the most important cause of impoverishment of the country, because its size and regulations from the state. And he is committed to downsize the state, to reduce the number of ministries, and to what he says is, I have a quote here, the only model that works for a country to grow is the model of freedom, limited government, free trade, and unrestricted respect for private property. I would say many people share that vision, although there are some, radical ideas according to which I think he cannot fulfill, like suppressing the central bank, banning the peso, and adopting dollarization. I think
that has been done elsewhere, no? I mean, dollarization is a thing that other countries have.
Well, Ecuador has dollarization and some other countries, but according to some economists, Argentinian economists, that's not the correct approach. And he is, you know, slowing down his more radical approaches to suppressing the central bank, or even his approach to the Pope has changed. He is not calling
Well,
him again.
the Pope was fairly, you know, what's I guess the word, gracious, but it doesn't mean that Milei is necessarily wrong. I mean, he didn't insult the papacy per se. He didn't insult the Catholic Church. He insulted this particular Pope, who is, I think, an outlier amongst popes, and he called him a communist. I don't know if that's politically wrong. I mean, if you took away the papacy, I think, you know, Francis, or whatever his actual original Argentine name was, you know, he sympathizes. I think, you know, he call him a fellow traveler. I don't know, but the Pope was gracious in response, I think.
Yeah, well, his last name is Bergoglio.
Yeah, I forget what's his full name.
His full name is Jorge Mario Bergoglio. Bergoglio is his last name, coming from Italy.
Right.
Well, you know, he is, I would say, a leftist priest, leftist pope, a Jesuit, but I don't think he deserves the insults that Milei said about him. But in any case, they have now a phone call. Milei said that he was wrong calling the Pope in the way he did, and he talked with the Pope, and I think that's over, because he is now not the candidate of a sector, of a fraction of the Argentinian population. He is now the president of all Argentinians, including those who didn't vote for him. So I think he is very intelligent, and he will moderate, in some sense, his speech. But on the same token, I would say he's very committed to major changes in Argentina. He is going to proceed with economic changes, but he has a lot of problems. I would say a friend of in Argentina that is a former minister of a previous government tells me that he is going to have a very difficult period of government, because first there are many entrenched interest in the Argentinian society that could try to stop him, steadily against major changes. And the second thing is that Milei hasn't the needed Congress support that he needs to carry out the reforms that he wants to bring to Argentina. So this is a process of negotiation in the Congress that could lead to more moderate approach that I think is what is going to have in economic terms. But in political terms, I think he's going to wipe out the political casta that has been governing in Argentina.
Right. So casta means the caste system, the kind of Politburo, the entrenched nomenclature, as the Soviets used to say, the nomenclatura, the people who are kind of list of names of getting all the perquisites of government. Is that what you mean by casta?
Yes, Yes, that's a kind of mafia-like.
Yeah, I mean it's basically, you know, there used to be monarchies, and monarchies had all these associated duchies and aristocrats and so forth, barons and whatnot, and we don't have that by the same names, but we by the same token we have that because there's kind of an entrenched royalty, I guess, of the bureaucracy where people have sinecures, they have jobs, they have placements and so forth, and they are getting all the benefits of the taxation system, which doesn't necessarily filter down to the people. You know, I think it's, you know, by their deeds they shall be known. You know, the people who espouse leftism, it doesn't necessarily always percolate to the people. You know, presumably they're socialists and they want the social fabric of the society strengthened. And you know, capitalists. You know, I mean, mind you, that's originally an epithet by Karl Marx as capitalists. I think they're free market people. They're always, you know, seen as, you know, helping the big companies and corporations and whatnot. But I think it kind of is an inversion. The actual, you know, free marketism seems to be more of a populist idea, at least per this election. And the people want the ability to do their own stuff. They want to have liberty and so forth. But I want to actually get some. You can discuss that if you like, and or some of the defining terms you have. You called Macri a liberal, and you called Bullrich a liberal. What do you mean by those terms, and how do they play out? And just lastly, did you kind of skipped over Menem in Argentine history, if I'm not mistaken? Anyway, that's a mix and match. I can go over them again if you'd like.
Well, Macri and Patricia Bullrich are liberal in the sense, in the ideological sense, more private property, respect to contracts. I would say, some say reducing the state size, others say making the state more efficient, open markets. You know, the most important principles against statism in
right. So they're not statists, because here
no.
we use liberal oftentimes.
Well, yeah, I know. In the United States, we use liberal in the sense of center left or left approaches against conservatives. In Latin America, when we say liberal, we are meaning center right, right in the political spectrum, you know, towards open markets and
so liberty. I mean, liberal means freedom, and so it's more kind of freedom to, you know, own your things, freedom to pursue your own path versus statism, say.
Yeah, and I think the sense that people have in Latin America about liberals is more accurate than the use we have here.
I don't disagree.
Because to be liberal is to have some values related to this.
So what would the Bolivarios, the Bolivarians, whatever, what do they call themselves? Say, you know, Lula, Morales, Petro, I don't know.
Well, they say that well, the left in the region, with differences amongst the leaders, are their approach is the state has a responsibility for solving social issues, and that's tricky. But because nobody says that the state has no responsibility in social issues, but saying that for the leftists means that they have to promote a bigger state with absorbing responsibilities on behalf of the poor people and the non-have people in the country, while people on the liberal side say we have responsibility to promote private employment, to promote investment, to promote open markets, so as to have people with employment and better salaries, not discarding the idea that the state in specific cases can contribute to public education, public health, infrastructure, housing, and the like.
Yeah. Now, if I had to come up with an example, I mean, just off the top of my head, because I mean, the places are football mad, so what we call soccer. And I think that the kind of the free market type would like to see a good soccer game with as little refereeing as possible. And I think that the left, kind of doesn't like the concept of winners and losers. It doesn't like the fact that one team will go home sad, and they kind of want an equality of outcome. So I think if we had to put it on as a football match, the left, the statists would have maybe 15 referees. They would make sure that the score always winds up tied, no matter what the teams are. They would try to equalize, to take the good players from one side and weigh them down a little bit, so they all kind of like wind up having the same kind of outcome on the soccer pitch. And I think that becomes a game that nobody really wants to watch. And oddly enough, the people, I think Charles Murray brings this up in his book Coming Apart. Oddly enough, the people that supposedly socialism is taking care of, they actually want a little more excitement. They want the kind of the rough and tumble of the actual soccer match played out in their lives. Winners and losers. Getting ahead, striving. They want the ability to change classes and so forth. And I think the socialists, the statists, they wind up kind of perversely, being on top and managing. They're the referees. They have jobs regardless of which players are on the pitch, and their job is secure, and they get to make the rules, and they like that. And oddly enough, I think it becomes a sclerotic society that has it's controlled and may have equality of outcomes, but it winds up being within a very narrow parameter of types of outcomes. Anyway, that's my horrible example.
Well, the problem is that sometimes this statist ideology not only want many referees, but want the referees playing instead of the players in the field. But also, we have to say, we cannot have soccer or football without referees. We need
absolutely. No, I totally agree. I think libertarian.
The problem is to have the proper amount of referees,
right,
not going beyond certain limits.
Absolutely.
And the main thing about this is rules. You have to have rules. The state have to bring together different interests in the society through the constitution, bylaws, and according to all the people interested, these are the rules, and the state should the rules and enforce the rules, not intervening in every case here and there.
Moreover, there has to be an equal application of the rules. I mean, I think that's really the key. Whether the rules get to be the token of power, they could be a bludgeon, a cudgel upon which they are misapplied. I mean, I think
that's what judicial system is for.
Well, I understand, but as it gets applied, I mean, is it applied equally in Venezuela, for instance? I mean,
no,
is the judicial system a neutral party, or is it
it's not a neutral party in Venezuela, is not a neutral party in Argentina, is not a neutral party in Nicaragua, and the like. And in some countries, you have, states, levels in which you have independent judiciary, and some other places where you have, that kind of intervened judiciary that answer to political pressures and to other business pressures and the like. That's what happens in all societies, and what we need is rules to halt this improper interference in the judiciary.
I agree. And I totally, I mean, we have American football, same word, different sport. There's been a war on football here for a variety of reasons, too violent, blah, blah, blah. But I think people tend to forget that the other aspect of it, which you're taking, guys who could do a lot worse violence, and you put them on a football field, and they get to have controlled violence. They get to have their animal passions or whatever work out and play, but within rules. They have to stop. They can't go head to head. They can't do this. They can't knock people down. They can't punch them in the face. So there's ways of getting out kind of the passions we have and play it out. I think that's why sports are so compelling. Anyway, as far as this sport, I think that I'm aligned with a lot of what you said. I'm probably a little bit more libertarian in spirit, with Javier Milei, and that kind of brings up an interesting point. I mean, libertarian has the word liberal, essentially in it. I think it's been miscast as kind of the standard, I guess reductionist aspects of far right, far this, far that. Like the Guardian has already called him, far right extremism. I don't know what that means. Is this a right left thing, or is this a different way of getting politics and trying to limit the number of referees on the field?
Well, in some cases we have far right people. People trying to impose their visions to the majority without discussion. People using violence to impose their views on the issues. I think that can be far right or far left,
right,
in the sense that
in practices in South America,
in practice, that the difference between tolerance and intolerance. You can have any view you might want to have, but you can discuss, debate, promote. What you cannot do is to impose those visions through violence. And I think violence is not only actual hitting people with a stick, is also, and mainly at these times, the use of improper narrative against the adversaries, the people you don't share visions with. I think that's a big difference. But I would come back to Milei, if you don't mind.
Yes, please.
Because he is promoting some issues in the economic realm that I think is important to mention. He promotes a dramatic reduction of public expenditure. Following the state reorganization, he aspires to cut expenses by 15% of the GDP. So he thinks in reduction the size of the state. I think that's very problematic, because not only because there are resistances for doing that, but because the problem from my point of view is not about reduction the size of the state, but spending in the proper areas in which the state has to spend: public health, education, infrastructure. That's law and order, and that's I think a way to work better. In some countries, and also in Venezuela, where I was working in the government about these issues, the idea of reducing the state didn't work and hasn't worked anywhere, because that when you say reducing the state, you are talking about many people, many functions that you have to reorganize instead of suppressing them. And I think it's a better approach to the role of the state. That's my vision on that.
Well, I understand that. I somewhat disagree, because I try to go back to first principles and which of these things could exist or did exist before the imposition of a certain agency to do it. we in the United States have a Department of Education, I believe. We have the Department of Health and Human Resources. We have a department of this. We have a department of that. Those things existed. It's not as if we didn't have health and resources or human services before HSS got developed. We didn't. It's not as if we didn't have housing before HUD was developed. It's not as if we didn't have education and wouldn't have education absent the Department of Education. These things, are affectations in a sense, and they're affixed to the body politic. Once they're there, they stay. It's like if you went swimming and you came out with some leeches, and you ask the leeches if they are happy with the situation, and obviously they are. They're in a situation where they do very little work. They're getting your blood and so forth. I mean, if you took a vote and you could go swimming and you have 15 leeches on you, and there's one of you, and you vote should and give the leeches every leech a vote. Should the leeches stay? I mean, they're going to vote yes because they're having a good time of it. But the question is, could you exist and did you exist without these things? Schools, obviously, we have the word public schools because obviously the public part is an adjective, which means that
do you agree with public education?
Well, I think it's a problematic thing. What happens? It depends where. In Nicaragua, there's probably public
here in the United States, in Massachusetts, where we are.
Public school.
Do you agree with that?
Well, I think it's been misused. I mean, this could be a whole different show. I think that the problem is that it becomes part of the bureaucracy, and it espouses certain state opinions and so forth, and it tends to be a big bloated bureaucracy. It's union run. And so oftentimes it becomes a function of feeding the teachers. Most of your budget in the schools go towards teachers and teachers' pensions. Most of the budget in the city of Newton, I think 60% or more, goes to the schools. People have been leaving the schools. Leaving my opinions aside, in the last 3 years in Newton, where we both live, in Massachusetts, which is a beautiful suburb and reasonably wealthy and should be functional, one out of, I think almost 20%, 1 out of 6 to 1 out of 5 people have left the schools. They're paying taxes for the schools. So they don't pay, for the schools directly as you do with private schools. They're willing to pay the taxes in Newton, and they're going to pay an extra $30, $50, $60,000 to send their kids somewhere else to private school. So schools exist. There are Catholic schools, there are Jewish schools, there are Muslim schools, there are other types of schools. There are, all different private variety that people can go to, and there's homeschooling. And people have been opting out of the public school system. So leaving my opinions aside, the actual people who are doing it have voted no. And it's this for something they're getting ostensibly free. So the public school model has its issues and problems. And obviously in states
I know, Randy, but I would say we both enjoy as parents the public school system here in Newton.
Well, again, my kids, my sons went to Newton Public Schools, and they both wanted to leave. We tried to get them out. They both got really tired of it. There was a lot of doctrinaire aspect. I don't want to, again, divert this too much, but, very briefly, my kids, they're men now, so not kids. But when they were there for art class, for instance, in middle school, this is during the George W. Bush era, they were told to, they had art class, and they were making posters about, the Iraq War and about, screw Bush and blah, blah, blah. Now, I'm not saying you should be for or against George Bush or for or against the Iraq War, but this was art class. And across the board, their classes have a political bent. And it's not, it's if they only did reading and writing and arithmetic and that kind of stuff, that'd be great. But the schools, scores, the resultant, SAT scores and all the other merit, based aspects that have been, monitored have gone down in Newton schools. So the actual quality of the product has diminished, and people have left the system. So it becomes a sclerotic system that tends to serve. It's a microcosm of statism in a sense, because it serves the people who are there. And the people who are there don't want to stop it. But we had an override election in Newton. Where people wanted to have more money to the schools when the schools were having a decline in enrollment. And so
you have public schools where those stream debates take place, but you have also private schools and universities and colleges where this debates take place too. You have regarding the contents of education, and maybe public schools spend more than private schools. I don't have the figures for that, but I would say the quality of education, public education, in some places match the quality of education of in private schools.
Outcomes. I don't disagree per se. I think most of the time that is a function of the people in that city. If you have a city where people are educated and they're cohesive, they're married couples and so forth, they're working hard, like a city such as the one we live in, yes. But if you go across the board in the state we live in, Massachusetts, you'll find that the schools, the public schools, pretty much track with the income and education level of that town. And for the most part, they trail private schools, they trail Catholic schools and so forth. So if you go to Everett, Malden, Brockton, Fall River, and so forth, you'll find, and Dorchester, part of Boston, so forth, pretty much the quality of the public schools. We have great public schools here, it's said, but most of that is the fact that we have a very high, master's degree, professional classes, college educated, dual income, dual parents at home who are reading to their kids, who are taking their kids and giving them cultural benefits and so forth of class. So what we have is basically a class system where the places where there's a high class, they manage to survive the public schools. I don't think the public schools innately themselves have a quality mechanism such as the private schools, because people don't have the ability to vote out of it and opt out of it. We pay for the public schools regardless. So when you pay for something, whether you want it or not, it tends to be that you're not going to get the same quality as elsewhere. So I think this kind of, just kind of segue back to Argentina and Milei. The whole point is,
we can go back. Yeah, we have gone
the
far
whole point
from
is that when people are getting paid no matter what they do, and they don't have a profit mechanism, that pretty much encompasses the state. Getting back to the football analogy, the soccer players on the field, the football players on the field, they have a lot more interest in their own personal quality because they're going to get paid. Their salaries depend on how well they do. The state apparatus, if you could have 50 referees or 100 referees and so forth, there's going to be indistinguishable between one and the other, and pretty much they're going to be into the refereeing, and they're going to be guaranteed. If they have a union and so forth, you can't get rid of them. The players don't have that same benefit usually, because if they don't play well, they get cut. We don't have that in public schools and so forth. We don't have that amongst the state. And I think what Milei, getting back to the schools and the whatever, I think what he's interested in is a place where people, sink or swim based on their efforts. And I think people want that too. They want the lattice work. They want the state to be just a single referee, let people play the game of life, let people have their, there's a quote I just read today, and I'll just give it, basically translated version. It's based on, the parable, if you give a man a fish, he eats today. If you teach a man a fish, he'll eat forever. And Milei said, I don't want to give you a fish. I don't want to teach you to fish either. I want you to use your own fishing rod. And if you don't have one, I want you to go find one and make one. So I want you to do the fishing. I don't want us to get out of the way. That's basically the libertarian philosophy. I don't think that's far right. I think that is central to liberty and liberal in the original sense. I think we have a lot of appurtenances, a lot of state apparatus that we think we need to have because we've had it so long that we've forgotten that we could do these things on our own. We can make our own schools. We can do homeschooling. We can do better than a lot of these rules, which get to be kind of meretricious, peremptory, and silly, as we've seen during COVID, for instance.
Well, we have visions on that. For instance, about the public schools again, I would say if you have good public schools and bad public schools, the problem is not about having public schools. It's about the context in which you have those schools, the quality of the teachers, the infrastructure, transport, the social condition of the families there, the support they have from the community, the involvement of parents in the supervising what is happening with their children, or the qualification of the parents, the education of the parents to foresee what is going to be best for their kids, a lot of things. So I would say that we are now in Latin America in a process in which the statist vision, statism, has gone in a situation that is not the most important concern of governments. Many people think, even center left people, that they have to open the economies, that they have to promote private initiative, that they don't have the resources because fiscal issues, the debt, and other macroeconomic problems to increase the size of the state. So I think many people are coming to terms in the idea that individual initiative, private property, freedom at the end is the best solution for countries. Although you have these people like Nicaraguan Ortega, this guy that ending the government in Argentina, Fernandez and Cristina Kirchner, or Lula to some extent, because Lula has been waving between positions. But besides those people, the mainstream is going to more open economies, more open societies in a time of turmoil in the world. We have a situation in which the old principles to guide societies, to guide governments are shaken, or in many senses destroyed, and not replaced by new ones. I would say this is a time of incertitude where people, including politicians and presidents and ministers, are trying to create a clear path in a time of tempest. So I would say this is a time of change. People are trying to change. I would say change is the most important word in the world right now. People wanting to change. Although not all change means the same.
It depends.
And not all try to do in the same with the same tools. You're not sure.
Well, I'm just saying change is an empty word for me. It's November and we're in the northern hemisphere, so change in the next few days means it's going to get colder and get worse. I like skiing, okay, but all things considered, I'd rather go backwards to the summer. Change in the southern hemisphere in November means it's going to get, right now they're having spring and it's going to be turned into summer. So change.
You're depleting the concept to nothing. That's, I don't agree with that. When I say change, is change of principles, values, ways to achieve goals, the ways in which societies plan to.
Okay, so let me ask you a question. All things considered, we have the various experiments. The wonder of South America is that there are hugely disparate governments and outcomes in a sense. So let's just look at the tiny little sliver of Central America. The actual Milei, as his first invite to his inauguration or whatever, is the president of El Salvador. I get his name right. I think it's Bukele, but you tell me. He could have invited El Salvador's neighbor, either Guatemala or I guess I'm not sure if they're exact neighbors, but Nicaragua. But he didn't, and I'm not sure they want to come. I don't think Petro wants to come. I don't think Maduro wants to come. I don't know. Maybe Lula will come. I don't know. But there's going to be a sorting hat like Harry Potter of which
Bukele,
team you are.
Bukele is a good example of a president that brings contradictory opinions on everything. because he is the most popular president in Latin America. He is the one that appears to have solved the main problem of security in El Salvador that was taken by the Maras, the criminal gangs. He solved that. But
and how did he solve it? How did he solve it?
Well, with the raids in the shanty towns, with imprisoned people, but at the same time, at the cost of human rights violations.
Well, it depends. I mean,
let me finish this. So, he's popular because he's solving a problem that was the main problem for the population of his country, but at the same time, huge human rights violations, because the police or the army wouldn't go to a place to pick, just a criminal guy, but, sometimes this guy, his family or her family, and the neighbors, and So I bring this because people think, many people think that, well, that's the cost for have, rule of law and peace in a country. But on the other side, many people, international organizations, to think, well, if you have to bring order, violating human rights, that's a cost that should be paid by a society.
Well, I find these things, getting back to first principles, a lot of these terms get applied in a certain way, but they also don't get applied in another time. I'm going to look at the exotic, foreign, dangerous country of Baltimore. Baltimore, is right outside of Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. is substantially safer than in parts than Baltimore, but overall it's safer than Baltimore. Baltimore is a dangerous place, and it's overrun by gangs and so forth. Now, if for instance I think Baltimore and El Salvador have similar problems. They almost rhyme as well. Maybe work that into a limerick. But the thing is, if you were to go in and break up the gangs, you have, in order to make an omelet, you got to break a few eggs. Is it a human rights violation currently to have gangs running Baltimore? Is it a human rights violation to have MS-13 run, huge swaths of neighborhoods in El Salvador? Or is it a human rights violation to have the status quo in Venezuela? These are ipso facto,
Randy, you don't have to explain me that those M13 and the colectivos in Venezuela violate human rights every day, all the time. But,
right.
The problem is if that enables the state to do the same.
Well, that's an open question. So the question is it a war footing? And just to kind of circle back to public schools, in Baltimore, the amount of kids in the Baltimore public school system, which used to be a wonderful system, who can read at grade level and do math at grade level, is approximately zero. There's 0% of the kids per annum, in each class, from elementary school on, who can read and do math at grade level. So these public schools fail, and so it has nothing to do with kids per se. It has to do with their upbringing. It has to do with the way that the parents operate things. It has to do with the fact that the public school doesn't have an actual mechanism for enforcing, or bringing quality to its own product. So this becomes a state issue. And then if the state is sclerotic, it's not doing its basic functions, then what is it there for? It's there to kind of keep the pensions populated and so forth. And nobody can fire anybody. Nobody gets fired in Baltimore public school system, and I'm sure nobody gets fired in Nicaragua. So the question is whether you can apply kind of a business model to certain aspects and functions of the state. And the only way to do that probably is to divorce them. Milton Friedman, this was, I'm not sure where it was, but I think it was the Aswan Dam in the 1960s and 70s in Egypt, and they were it's a huge public works project, and apparently, according to the story, there's a lot of money, I don't know, worldwide money, there to help Egypt with the Aswan Dam, for better or for worse. We'll say it's a public good to have the Aswan Dam, and on the Nile, and collect water, whatever. So that he notices that the workers are, they're using shovels, and they have all these backhoes, these electronic, machines to do the work, and the guys are using shovels and so forth to dig. And he asked the Egyptian, what's going on? He says, well, this way we can keep a lot of people employed. We can, if we use a bulldozer, we can only keep, 5 people employed. We have shovels, we can do 500. He says, oh, so he said, why don't you just give them teaspoons, and then you can employ, thousands more. Because I thought this was a project to get the dam built. They see it as a project to get their, political cronies paid off and have a kind of make work project. So it's kind of like, Milton Friedman, I think, aligns with Javier Milei, and the concept here is, what is the actual purpose? What is the telos of the Aswan Dam project? Is it to build a dam, or is it to get people paid and have your political, payoffs all checked off? And I think this is a standard issue of politics. I mean, politics is the people, and it's basically kind of a team sport, and you get your people in, and then you satisfy them, usually at the cost of efficiency and actual end product. And that's why you have sclerotic states. I mean, most of these things are kind of teetering along on poverty one way or another, and the only way to get out of it is human endeavor and ingenuity, which I think, I'm not going to say it's going to be perfect experiment with Milei, and he may not succeed. He may not be.
Well, the problem that Milei has is that he promised to apply shock therapy for a devastated country. Argentina has right now, year over year, more than 140% inflation. The quarterly inflation in the third quarter of this year has been 28%, and monthly inflation is 8.3%. So that is, a problem. And the debt to the International Monetary Fund is $44 billion, which is huge in terms of our Argentinian economy. And Milei wants to adopt the US dollar as a means of payment instead of the Argentinian peso, as we said, which he described very vividly as the excrement of the political class, the peso. He wants to abolish also the central bank, and he wants to radically cut public spending, which we already discussed, and slash the number of ministries in the government. So he can do that. He's going to do that without the proper political support. It is wise to do that, to dollarize the economy, cutting the possibility of having monetary policy with a central bank. There are open questions that we'll see in the next month. He's going to take office in a month. So we'll see what's going on. I suggest you to have that we can have together an interview with the former minister of finance of Argentina to discuss this issue.
Oh, that'd be lovely. That'd be lovely.
Well, that's has been a pleasure to be here again.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. I look forward to seeing you again on our show and in person, hopefully soon.